Welcome to Ion Franchising, where you will learn the A to Z's of franchise. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another fabulous episode of Ion Franchising. I am your host, Lance Graulich, and today, yes, you guessed it, a special guest. This is a really special guy that I know very well, and boy, we're going to talk about it. So he was the youngest Australian representative at the United Nations. Yes, Australian. Don't call him British or anything else like that. He left that career after he fell in love with, of all things, franchising, which we're going to hear about. And today he's a franchisor, a multi-brand franchisor, as well as being a franchisee. And he's CEO of Raintree, and his name is Brent Dowling. And Brent is also the franchisor of Voodoo Brewing Company, which we're going to be talking about today. Welcome, Brent.
G'day, Lance. Thanks for having me, mate.
It is awesome to have you here, and I look forward to really diving into everything Brent and everything beer today. So welcome to the show. Why don't you start with the history of Brent in franchising? How did you end up at the United Nations in the first place? And let's give us that little history.
Yeah, I guess the short story, I came to the States originally as a competitive snowboarder, and rather than drinking my nights away like a lot of my colleagues at the time did, I nailed out a few degrees. A couple of them were international relations. So in snowboarding, you're a veteran when you're 19 or 20. Like, it's crazy. You're done. You're washed up. And so hit that age and got done with snowboarding and applied to work at the Australian mission to the UN. That was the dream job at the time, right? I was going to make a difference in the world, go to the UN and help the world become a better place. Turns out it's far more ceremonial than actually in any impact really being made there on a regular basis. And I learned that. I guess a funny story is I got invited to represent Australia at the UN Disarmament Conference, big conference, right? And there's a lot of brands there, and a lot of countries there, all of them. And I'm this kid, I walk in, I'm 30, probably 30, 40 years younger than the average representative or diplomat there. And I remember walking in the first day, a lot of the countries were looking at me like, what are Australia doing, right? So I sat down and I thought, no, I got this. By day 4 or 5, they were literally arguing about the placement of a period in this document that they were discussing. And I was so bored, I was flipping through the different languages. And I remember at the time I was on an African language, and I'm like, oh God, this is exciting. This is a good one. And the Austrian guy next to me looks at me real funny. And then I'm like, what is he looking at? These Europeans are weird. And then sure enough, a few more countries looked at me. Maybe a minute, a little less than that, the whole of the UN General Assembly is staring at Australia, and I'm thinking, oh no, they asked us a question and I was listening in a different language. And that was probably the first hint that I wasn't really cut out for that diplomatic kind of bureaucratic life. And so I went back to school, got an MBA, came across franchising, some coursework, found it to be super interesting, finished the MBA, moved back to the States, got the first job in franchising I could.
So wait, what are they teaching in college about franchising? That just popped up somewhere? There was a chapter dedicated to it?
Yeah, it was like the tiniest little bit of coursework on it. There was a variety of different business models, from licensing and franchising and corporate growth, et cetera. And yeah, that was the first time I ever saw it. And you hear it, right, Lance, all the time. People are like, I thought franchising was just McDonald's. And you unpack it and realize it's this incredible, wonderful, beautiful, giant industry that fuels almost everything, you know?
Yep, exactly. So keep going. Sorry, I cut you off over there.
No. Well, yeah. So I guess, yeah, as I said, I took that first job. It was like an entry-level marketing job for a popcorn retail franchisor here in Boulder, Colorado. And they hired me, or brand new to franchising, really. They hired me to do the marketing on both sides, for the development side and then for the consumer side, right, to help the franchisees. And then they hired my partner now, Mike Edwards, who is the president and co-owner of Raintree, to do the sales. Together, we took them from 5 to 300 or 400 units in just under a few years. And two things happened at that time for me that kind of brought me here today. The first thing was, as I said, I got to work a little bit on the consumer side. And so I got to like see and learn about these franchisees on a deeper level. Like once they signed an agreement, got to watch them open their business, got to listen to them talk about how their life had changed in such a dramatic way, from most of them being under the corporate ladder, most of them having those golden handcuffs, to just the fun they were having with this popcorn franchise, the money they were making for a young kid at the time too. I was like, man, you can make that much money in a popcorn franchise, running popcorn franchises. And so I started to like really understand the model and see it in a different way, and get attracted to it from that way too. I was watching along thinking, man, I'd like to do that. And so at the same time, we had a lot of franchise brands saw what we did with Doc Popcorn, and we were getting job offers at various brands saying, hey, can you want to come and work? Do you two want to come and do that for us? And we thought, well, yeah, what we did is kind of unique, but I think we could scale it and help more than one brand this time. Why don't we give it a crack and see if we're right? And so we started Raintree. We worked with a few brands. It worked well. All of them, or most of the first few, did that what they were supposed to do. We learned some hard lessons and built a franchise development company from that. Ultimately, that's what Raintree does now today, right? We identify really strong brands, elite brands with really strong unit level economics. And we can talk about all those things later perhaps, but we work with select brands to find the right franchisees for them and grow them very responsibly, but often pretty quickly too.
I love it. Yeah, and the franchise world in general, people don't realize how large it is. You mentioned McDonald's, which is something that tends to come up in every one of my podcasts, because so many people in America just think of McDonald's and that's where franchising begins and ends. A lot of my franchise deals today as a franchise broker are under $150,000 or $150,000 and less. So home service brands and kids brands, whatever it might be. It's not just restaurants, although that is a dominant sector or segment, as well as personal care. Personal care is another big one. So let's switch gears and talk about Voodoo. So Voodoo is one of the great brands that's in the Raintree family, and you are the franchisor. So let's dive into Voodoo today. There's not very many brewery type franchises. So how did that come about, and what attracted you to Voodoo, and talk about that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. They came to Raintree looking for some help. They tried to grow the franchise for a couple of years. I think they started in 2018, and over 2 or so years, they were able to bring in 2 franchisees. But like most franchise wars and franchise brands, right? The idea of growing a national company and finding the right franchisees is a lot easier said than done. Right. And so they rocked up to Raintree, and what I like, well, honestly, I'm Australian and they're beer related, and those two things typically go pretty well together. Yep. So I was in fact really interested in the idea of a brewing concept, certainly like craft beer, and we got into it. We brought them on as a Raintree brand. For the reasons that Lance too, right? Like certainly when you think of a brewery operation, what came to my mind was, wow, I'm going to need $1 million, $2 million, $3 million to do it. I get it. Really cool beer, top 50 rated international beer. Awesome. But I don't have that type of capital to open 1, 2, or 3 of those. And as we dug in and learned more, we realized it was a really intelligent model. All the brewing is done by the master brewer at our home location in Pennsylvania. And it's shipped. These are some of the best beers in the world, but they're shipped to the brew pubs or the franchise owners, and they just get to be the heroes that sell this extremely high-rated beer and well-known and loved beer. And then it just kept getting smarter and smarter from there. We dug in and realized they were ahead of the times, really. They built this model. It's probably 15 years in the making, but the franchise model, at least a few years prior to 2018, were developing it. And what they did is they mimicked the European beer hall cafe style thing, which ultimately means that you order your food and drinks at the bar and you go and pick it up at the counter. Why is that important? Why do I think that's intelligent? Well, it means you only need 4 or 6 people to run a pub. You don't have wait staff. You don't have all these things that, funnily enough, in the years following that, caused a lot of pain to restaurant franchise owners. Yeah. And we've never had to deal with that. And so that was really the second thing is just the simplicity of operations, lower overhead, higher profits, all those things that we love. And so they did get hit by the pandemic, right? Like every food franchise, every type of operation in that realm, most of us had to kind of shut our doors there during COVID, and that obviously stung them. And we saw how great the model was. We hadn't really kicked off the national franchising program yet, but we saw that, they were looking at the idea of saying, well, maybe we should not invest in a national franchise program. As you know, Lance, it's not cheap to go out and market a franchise nationally. I don't think folks understand the amount of resources it takes to put the brand on the map and filter through all the candidates to find the right ones. It's a lot of money. And they thought, man, we're scared. We've got the doors are shut here. We don't know when they're going to open again. We don't know when this pandemic thing's going to be closed. And we sort of said, look, we love this. We're confident in the Raintree team's ability to continue to find the right people, even when your doors are shut. And so confident that let us fund it, let us buy it, let us invest in it. And so that was over about a year ago now. We finalized that and have been franchising nationally since. And sure enough, the Raintree team's done what they were supposed to do and then some. We asked them to find us 6 great franchise owners in the first year, again, in a pandemic environment, and they found 20 for us, and it's just been going crazy since.
I love it.
That's kind of the backstory there on how that came about.
You hit on something so important. I with the help of multiple franchise attorneys, I help quite a few people, independent brands, set up a franchise system. And a lot of times they'll ask me, well, what's the hardest thing? I said, well, when you have a good concept that you're willing to share with the world, the next thing you have to do, really, aside from setting up the system, is finding your first few amazing franchisees. So it's funny, you just brought that up. People underestimate, it's like building a fraternity, if you will, or sorority. You have to have a few good people coming along for the ride that share your vision. And people underestimate that. This business, like a marriage, is all about relationships, and it's all about people. Sure, having a concept that works is important, but that seems to be the easier part in some instances. So share a little bit about that. So you've been franchising Voodoo. You've been in ownership for about a year, and it's been franchising a little bit longer than that. So how many sold and how many open roughly right now?
I would say 30 something. I own a doggy daycare franchise too, so you always see dogs in at Raintree. I think we've got 12 open thus far, and probably 40 or 50 in development from there right now.
40 or 50 in development. I figured. Don't want to hold you to it, but
and I think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna. You were sort of talking before about the challenge of finding those first few franchisees, and I couldn't agree with you more. I got some data put on my desk the other day, and it looked clean. It looked good data too, but it certainly showed that 67%, I think it was 67, maybe it was 68, don't quote me exactly, Lance, but let's say 67% of franchisors fail to recruit a single franchisee within their first 2 years of the program. It means the great majority just can't find them. It's not easy, and it's a testament to the brands that do, and also the testament to the franchisees that find that right match too. A lot of times for both sides, it doesn't work out, and that's why it's so worth celebrating, especially young brands on the rise, and so exciting for both sides.
So you gave some special elements to Voodoo, the European style beer hall. There is a great menu as well that's not just typical bar food, right? So talk a little bit about the food.
Yeah, they do such a good job. It's a pretty eclectic menu. They call it, we like to call it elevated pub food. So some of the things that you'll see on a typical pub menu, just done different. Voodoo's kind of a weird brand, right? And they embrace that. It's about that, right? And so they do a lot of really cool things. A lot of the beer is used in the cooking, and a lot of the different beer brands. So folks who most people that frequent a Voodoo end up going back and becoming a fanatic and loving one or two specific types of beers. And then they'll see that brand of beer will also be used in the chicken parm or whatever it is on the menu to see the actual beer they love. And people love that. So yeah, we've got a couple great chefs now. We have a couple of folks on the support team that are just dedicated to working with the franchise owners, helping them craft the right menu for their location. One of the cool things about Voodoo that I was really attracted to is, franchising, some people get scared by that cookie cutter, this is exactly how we do things and you better do it this way. And for the most part, people understand why that is. And it makes sense for some people or a lot of people. For some people, it doesn't. It's the deal breaker of, man, I want this to feel like my own a little bit. And Voodoo does that. They do that in a way where, in so many different ways, as I said, the chef will work with every franchise owner to say, hey, what's special to your local market? What do you think people like here, and how can we do it a little different? And let's build that menu together based on the success, what we've seen in others. Let's individualize it for you. The Voodoo logo, right? Like, so this is one t-shirt, one basic logo, but this is a pub, one of the newest pubs, West Pike. Every single franchisee works with our artists to create their own Voodoo logo specific to their community. And that's a really cool thing. They work and they create all types of art and design to reflect and embrace and to demonstrate what's cool about their community. And it's just that anti-cookie cutter element that a lot of people, a big part of why I think the brand's growing so quickly. People are really attracted to it, from the menu to all the little things that matter.
So who are these franchisees? I've asked this type of question before, and it never ceases to amaze me that franchisees of any brand seem to come from all walks of life. I'm guessing Voodoo is no different. Tell me about the first 6 or so franchisees that signed up or signed on that you accepted or awarded franchises to. They were, from all walks of life. What did they do before Voodoo, and why Voodoo?
Yeah, I love this question. I remember when you came to Raintree and train my team on kind of the art of finding the right people for the right brands. And you talked about this a little bit, and it's true. We're seeing it at Voodoo. You talked about, it's really about matching the right person with the right skills to the right brand. And sometimes, I think folks can get a little too focused in on their passion and thinking that because they're passionate about something, that they're going to be a successful franchise owner in it. And they're often mutually exclusive things, right? And so why I say that is we do get a lot of folks, the commonality is folks that love craft beer, and they think, man, I could own a business where I get to talk craft beer all day. That's a tick, that's a plus, but there's been many of folks we've had to say, I don't know if you've got what the skill sets needed are to be successful in this business. And for that reason, we're going to have to say, I'm so sorry, but we're going to part ways. Yeah. And so what are those things that we're there looking for? I think the biggest thing is, really community focused people. Craft beer is truly a community. It's about gathering community and celebrating good food and good beer and good cocktails. And if you're not intrinsically attached to the idea of being a leader in your community and fostering community within your community, if that makes any sense. Yeah. You may not do as well as some of the owners that we're seeing here just kick it, rock it and roll right now. So community, food and beverage experience is not essential, but it's a plus, right? If you've had experience, if you've worked in a restaurant, if you really understand what that looks like, it's a plus. And I certainly think that team leadership as well, folks that have ran teams, whether they've come from corporate America in a senior role, middle manager role, any type of role there, we see folks come with. And I think we see a combination of, community, food, and or team leadership management skills. You see a pretty eclectic mix there. At the last Discovery Day, we had a franchise consultant, which is obviously a good sign when experts are coming to say, hey, I want to buy one. Yes. So we had one of those, but we had an investment banker to somebody that had ran restaurants their whole lives. The investment banker had never really done that. Pretty eclectic mix. One thing that you'll find is, I think by design, it's about the culture for us more than any of that. And, you walk in, the support team is there to greet everybody. 9 out of 10 of them were in like a tank top and flip flops while they're on the brewery compound there. And if that excites you, if that's the type of tribe of squad you want to be around, then yeah, Voodoo's for you. If you're a little perplexed why these guys, as successful as they are not in suits and ties, then it probably isn't the right culture for you.
I love it. I love that's a fun culture for sure. So talk a little bit about the selection process. I mean, obviously the way it starts is whether somebody comes across your website because they saw something exciting on social media, maybe they visited a location, or they came through a franchise broker like myself. At some point, they start the process. Talk a little bit about that process all the way up to discovery day and awarding franchises.
Yeah, so we do something pretty unique in franchising. So of course, a significant part of our franchise system is brought to us by franchise consultants by yourself. We love those because we know they're coming in well educated. Less work for my development team. They know for the most part they're well prepared and they understand what they're getting into. But we also advertise the brand nationally through the standard channels of Facebooks, et cetera. But we also use industry specific channels too, which we don't see many franchise brands do. Like we're on craft beer websites, we're in communities there and in the craft beer community advertising it there. So we get a lot of folks coming in. So what that does is it does change the process a little bit because you get a lot of folks, and this is kind of my favorite thing, by the way, right now, and I'll explain why. But when you get somebody that's come in that is not really looking for a franchise, and I'm sure you see this too, Lance, but when you come in and they're like, it's back to our conversation before, I thought Voodoo's a franchise. I thought it was just for places like McDonald's. Well, no, dude, actually there's all these industries and so you have to explain and make sure they're educated on franchising in general. And I think that's really fun because people's especially in the current world, right, where you've got people becoming more deflated by corporate America and understanding they're just a cog in the system, and they're starting to be enlightened by what they're actually doing and scared by it. And a lot of these folks that come across a franchise opportunity like Voodoo on a non-franchising channel, their eyes light up when you tell them, when they understand there's folks that and especially when they speak to the franchise owners, when they hear things like, yeah, man, I was in that grind too. It sucked. I was miserable. I didn't know how miserable I was. Now I get to run my own pubs. I have a team. I'm embedded in my community. And by the way, I'm making more money than I've ever made combined in the last few years in corporate America. They hear these things and it's the same comment every time. Wow, I didn't know there was franchising and as a model.
Why didn't I do this sooner?
Right. And, we're pretty pumped on it. It's kind of the mission now at Raintree is not only to make sure that we're really, really good at matching the right franchisees to the best franchisors, but how can we do our bit to further just general knowledge and understanding and awareness of franchising for the millions of Americans out there that are miserable in corporate America, that are sitting in traffic all day and sitting in their cube. And the best part of their day is checking their phone when their boss isn't watching. And when you get those people out of that, it feels like a matrix, right? Especially in a brand like Voodoo. It feels like you're unplugging them. And so we want to do our bit to learn to get better on these other channels so we can help more people understand that while it's not for everyone, it is for a lot of people. And so that's a long ranted way of saying, yeah, we've got kind of a process where we have to educate in franchising. And then once they get it, it's rocking and rolling. It's the standard process of all the things, they go through an FDD, speak to owners, come to discovery day, et cetera.
Well, I guess the easy part is when you get them face to face finally, you have a beer with them, you can tell instantly, even if you haven't met them prior, you personally, I'm sure, can tell that this is somebody that is right, that will fit in the culture of Voodoo, whether they were a school teacher or an investment banker or a restaurant manager. You can tell probably fairly quickly. Do they have the hospitality chops, so to speak, or the ability to be a Voodoo franchisee? I'm sure that's the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And culture's the hard one. So all the things that we're looking for as franchisors, and that you're looking in your clients to match to the best brands. The skill sets are easy. If there's a little passion there that works for a particular segment, yeah, that's easy. We've probably got options for you so long as you've got the skill sets. The culture is a little harder to define. And I often get asked that, by some of the candidates that we work with too. And, how do I understand if I'm a good fit for the culture? I mean, to me, ultimately, it's spending the time, speaking to enough franchise owners. Certainly, if you get to that, you get that invite, spending the day or more with the franchise brand, asking questions. Ultimately, you're trying to understand, what values do these people have?
Yeah.
What are their goals? Ultimately, you're asking and you're trying to understand, do we see the world the same way, right? Do we communicate in a similar way? There's all these little things that are different to every person. And ultimately, it's one of those things that isn't quite tangible. I feel like if you do the homework, if you listen to your franchise consultant, if you truly ask enough questions and do the homework that the brand is asking you to, in your heart of hearts, you'll know if you're a culture fit or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was Steve Jobs, I think, was the one that always said he wanted to break bread with, a key employee or executive. And once he knows he had a meal with them and you could tell how they treat the server in the restaurant, if it's a nicer restaurant or what have you, how that person's going to be as an employee, whether they're going to be a culture fit or not. So if all the Zoom calls fail, by the time you get them face to face, you figure it out, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So the Zoom Discovery Day got big because it had to during COVID, and a lot of the brands that we worked with sort of said, "Hey, I feel like they worked well. Can we just keep doing those?" I think for the most part, it was coming from a place of efficiencies. It was just a lot easier. You didn't have to, travel and all these things. And our advice at the end of the day was, look, this is at least a 10-year relationship. There's something to be said, like you said on the Steve Jobs side, there's something to be said about shaking someone's hand and looking them in the eye if you're truly trying to find a culture fit. I don't know if that can be replicated as well on Zoom. So we were pretty quick to say, you can, but we wouldn't.
Yeah. There's a difference between good and great. So I don't know if you can really have a great discovery day over Zoom, but it can be done. Let's talk about economics. So what is the average? Obviously, a disclaimer for everyone listening and playing along at home, listening to this episode. In the restaurant space or in the food space, there's certainly a big difference between a vanilla shell taking over a fresh space that's never been inhabited before versus potentially a second generation space that you get to convert. But having said all that, and of course, with supply chain issues and everything else the world has experienced, what is Voodoo like today on average? What's the square footage, investment, all in, et cetera?
Yeah. The square footage, typically 4,000 to 5,000 square feet we're looking for in terms of a brew pub. The investment range is 350 to 700, somewhere around there. We've got, to your point, conversions. We've had a couple of those, and they've been significantly less than the lower. I won't state those numbers because legal, Schmiegel, my attorney, will yell at me. But what we're really seeing on average right now is probably $500,000 to get the first brew pub up and running in about 4,000 or 5,000 square feet.
And are most people getting financing? I'm assuming most people don't have 500,000 sitting in the bank they want to part with.
Yeah, absolutely. Most people, we're looking at about 25% down to secure the funding for the rest of the first location, and going from there. It's interesting. So we don't have an item 19 purely because it's been the first full year of franchising. There were corporate pubs that were more like satellites to the brewing facility and probably not a fair representation of what a franchisee would be. So we wanted to play it safe and didn't have it. We will have it next year. Again, there's legal considerations here. When our candidates get to validation and they hear some of the numbers being put up by our franchise owners, they're often shocked in a good way. And I'll leave it at that just to be safe. But
let's talk about your validation process just in general terms. Do you give prospective franchisees a list of all your franchisees or their group calls? How do you do validation for Voodoo?
Yeah, we try to organize group calls like you've seen a lot of times, Lance. You've got more prospective owners than you've got open franchisees, and so to be respectful of the time, we try and do a weekly call where we get everybody on, all the candidates that are in that phase, and they get to ask away. And Validation is fantastic right now. There's just so much excitement across the entire brand, and it's pretty obvious when you jump on those calls. Certainly, we do offer for candidates that feel like they didn't get their questions answered in that. We try to facilitate one-on-ones and help them as best we can to get as much information from the owners as possible. So ultimately, it's group calls first, and if needed, some one-on-one calls. Quite frankly, we don't have to do many of those one-on-one calls. The group calls have been pretty effective. A lot of the questions are similar, so most candidates feel like they're getting their answers.
Yeah. I love validation. I explain to my candidates or my clients how valuable it is. Some people are so apprehensive at the beginning of the process. They don't know what they're looking for. They're not sure what's good for them. And as you mentioned earlier, and I mention often, your skills are transferable. So it's about getting somebody comfortable and confident that they really can do this and don't have to, can escape that W-2 job and do it on their own. But validation really helps because people do see themselves as that individual they're speaking to. It's like, wait a second, Brent was like me. I can do that. Brent hated his job and he had X amount of dollars and he got a loan just like our strategy is. And you can obviously see it. So it's a beautiful process that a lot of people don't even know exists in franchising. They think it's this magical thing. You have a call with McDonald's and you slide your credit card and you're a franchisee, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting too in validation, like the surprises that come up. So one of the perceptions that our candidates have, they kind of think of it as, well, I'd love to do one, maybe even three. That's probably $500,000 for one, 1.5. That's a lot of cash to fork out. When you understand that the relationships we have with funding and how you can scale it, for example, on the last call, a candidate asked, when do you plan, and what year do you plan to open your second location? This gentleman's only been open about a month or two. And he said, I'm almost signing my second LOI right now. I've signed my second LOI, honing in on the lease. And he explained that, he got funding. He already is cash flow positive in the second month. He's rolling that straight into the down payment for the second location. And I think that folks, when they understand kind of the relationships that franchising has is unique. They also often learn that, franchising's got a huge advantage over, say, starting your own craft brewery franchise business or starting your insert anything business, because banks have a history of financial performance, evidence of successful replication. They can point to strong leadership. They understand the systems involved, and ultimately they understand when they're lending out money, they're placing bets, and their bets are better placed on franchise brands where there's evidence of this being done successfully many times. And I think folks are often surprised to see the relationships and that whole process of getting funding. The SBA loans can take a long time, but the countless other options that are available to them, and again, the willingness of banks to fund their new business purely because it's a franchise. And that's kind of one that, we try and do a decent job of, but the franchisees validate that better than anything. And it's cool to see.
Yeah. Well, place your bets on a franchise. It's pretty much a sure thing when you pick the right one, right?
That's all right.
So Brent, give us some final thoughts and words of wisdom for those listening at home. You just dropped a bucket of thoughts on people, but add a few more. I mean, for the people that are apprehensive, which is most of America, we're going through some interesting times now, and the food business, especially alcohol related, seems to do incredibly well during recessionary times. But barring that, just franchising in general, why a franchise? You gave some good nuggets on the financing side, but why specifically? What if somebody has an idea to start their own thing? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I tell them it's better, right? But you have to ask a lot of questions, and ultimately and honestly, it's not usually the case. Here's where if you are considering doing your own thing, it may be better. If you're a true entrepreneur, right? And there are very, very few of those out there. I barely consider myself one. I really honestly question it. Still not decided if I would label myself that yet or not. But if you are one, chances are that you're not going to be happy in a franchise. The mechanisms of support and control, and hey, this is the way we've done it because it's successful and it's making everyone successful. We want you and need you to do it this way. And entrepreneurs are not going to like that. They'd rather do it their way and fail, right? And that's totally okay, or succeed. And so we look for that. If that's, a big part of why you're wondering, should I just do this on my own? Is the royalty and franchise fee worth it? Yeah, if you're a true bred entrepreneur, then maybe. If you're not, like the great majority of us, chances are that a franchise is going to bring you better value in starting the business. It's certainly, you hear a lot of numbers out there. You've seen a lot of nonsense about franchising has a 95% success rate. I think that's nonsense. I think that the jury's out on what those numbers really are. It's hard to determine. As someone that's been around this industry long enough, I certainly believe that your dramatically increases your chance of success with a franchise, but they still fail. And they fail often, in my opinion, because you didn't understand the true skill sets needed to be successful. You probably didn't really understand the top performing franchisees, the majority of the system that are all doing well. Why were they doing well? What skills did they have, and how are they applying those? And like we talked about, in sometimes the scenario is you're just not a culture fit, and the communication with the franchisor isn't there. So if you can really work to understand, do I have the skills and do I fit the culture? And yeah, I'm a massive advocate of doing it with a franchise. Again, I'm not the smartest guy. I'm a snowboarder, right? I came here as an Aussie snowboarder, and in 10 years, certainly I say this to my team and to my franchisees and the folks that ask me, Brent, should I own a franchise? Look, I'm really not that sharp. I'm probably of average intelligence. I just happen to fall in love with franchising, ask enough questions, and I've been able to leverage that to own franchise brands, become a franchisee of a few different concepts, and have a franchise development company. I don't think there's any other industry where an idiot like me could have found that same sort of growth path. And I thank franchising for it every day. It's a beautiful thing. So, I mean, that's kind of skills and culture. You find those, it's hard to go wrong.
Well, it sounds to me like I didn't officially bring up the obsessed with franchising piece, but I think you just, it was self-evident in that answer. The average person doesn't have an original idea that really needs to be born, where they truly have the skill set to sort of produce that or manifest that, if you will. So franchising is going to be the next best thing for the majority of America. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, those of us that become obsessed with it, which is, most of the people that I work with and the network that I have, when I think about it all the time, right? Because oftentimes, again, I wake up and I think, how did this happen? How did an idiot like me get to work with these brands and help brands grow like this? How did I end up here? And so I've spent some time dissecting it. And I think that, when I boil it down for at least my own experience, my partners and the franchisees I work with, the big thing is community, right? Where I believe, are a breed of folks that have goals for ourselves and want better lives and all the things, right? That's very common across the United States. But there seems to be this intrinsic theme of community involved in us. And it's wanting to win, but to win with a team and to do it with a team. And I think that, if you're a person that likes the idea of community, that understands the need to tap into it, to learn from those around you, are humble, are coachable, and also really thrive by the team win, by seeing your fellow franchisees hit new records and milestones and truly being happy for them, and then taking those learnings and applying them to yourselves, all these things. And when I boil it down, I think I like community. And I think that if you like community too, it's a good hint that you're on the right path.
I love it. Well, Brent, on that note, perfect place to end it. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom. Brent Dowling, CEO of Raintree, franchisor of Voodoo Brewing Company, and more. Thanks for being here.
Cheers, Lance. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for listening today. Please like, follow, and subscribe. This is Lance Graulich. Until next time.